What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a minute since my last vlog. I'm actually recovering from a meniscus injury that I'm rehabbing. Had to postpone some projects that I was supposed to shoot at the beginning of this month to next month or at the end of this month. The good thing is I'm feeling a lot better. My knees feeling a lot stronger. I'm back to doing cardio. I'm even in Studio City right now waiting for my order from Royalty Juice Bar, trying to get on my healthy kick. That is a great place to go to if you want some healthy options. I highly recommend checking it out. But today's video, we talking about the Canon C70, which I received during my little off time, and this camera is phenomenal. So I wanted to kind of just share the 5 things that kind of stand out to me, 5 things I love about this camera off the back. There's so many more, but we're just gonna keep it to 5 today. So the first thing I love about this camera is the new Super 35mm RF mount DGO sensor that it borrows from the Canon C300 Mark III. Now DGO stands for dual gain output. It takes 2 separate readouts and combine it into one, giving you the best of the highlights and the best of the lowlights. What I really love about that is that it's giving you 16 plus stops of high dynamic range, which is just phenomenal in such a small camera body. And I was a little jealous of the C300 having the DGO sensor, even though for C500 Mark II shooters, as I'm a C500 Mark II owner and a previous C200 owner, if you have a C500 Mark II, you can up the spatial filter to 1, because it normally comes standard at 0, and that'll give you low lights that rival the DGO sensor. But getting back to the DGO sensor, where I see difference in before I had the C500, if you shoot with Canon, C-Log 1 will give you about 11 stops of dynamic range, C-Log 3 will give you about 13 stops of dynamic range, and C-Log 2, which has the highest dynamic range, allows you to achieve 15 plus stops of dynamic range and more. So that's the reason why like the EOS Rs and R5s and R6 can't really do 13 stops or 15 stops. It's not that the camera is not capable, but those cameras only have C-Log 1 at the moment. The thing about log and Canon footage is that in the shadows it's really, really noisy. When I shot with the C200 didn't have C-Log 2 internal, it only had C-Log 3. And a lot of times when people want to avoid the noise and shooting in log with Canon, they prefer to shoot in C-Log 3 because it's easy to color grade and there's less noise in the shadows. But with C-Log 2, as I said before, if you want the widest gamut of dynamic range, you have to shoot C-Log 2. But with the DGO sensor, you don't have to choose between 3 and 2 anymore because it's a drastic less amount of noise, in my experience, than when I shot with C-Log 3 and the C200. So for me, the C-Log 2 out of the Canon C70, which I'm shooting on right now, is equivalent in the noise department as C-Log 3, which is a huge step up. The other benefit, like I said, it's an RF mount, so I can adapt so many more lenses to the Canon C70, not to mention if I want that full frame look, I can use the Canon focal reducer onto the Canon C70 and get that full frame look. Now, one downside, I'm not gonna say it's a downside, but one thing I just wanna make point, it's not gonna give you the same shallow depth of field as the C500 Mark II or full frame cameras. It just allows you to have that full frame sensor, which is cool, I'll take that. It gives you an extra stop of light, but the shallow depth of field is not gonna be the same. But it's still great, it allows you to mount a lot of different glass onto the Canon C70 in such a small form factor. It's pretty dope. The second thing I love about this camera is the high frame rates. We finally got 4K 120 in the Canon C70. Well, it was first in the Canon C300 Mark III, which I was jealous of as I paid more money with the C500 Mark II, and that can only do 120 at 2K with a 16mm crop, where the C70 is now giving me what I was jealous of with the C300 Mark III at half the price, giving me 4K 120 with dual pixel autofocus. It's not face tracking like the R5 and R6, but it gives you center, kind of like the Canon C100 Mark II, but that is a welcome addition to the Canon C70. The third thing I love about this camera is the Codec. Now there's gonna be some people that don't like the fact that this camera can't shoot RAW, but as someone who owns the Canon C500 Mark II and who previously owned the Canon C200, which only gave you 2 options. You can either shoot 4K 12-bit RAW or 4K 420 8-bit. The 4K 12-bit RAW, beautiful image, but the files, what you need for storage space, what you need for memory card is just an added cost, And for me, the 422 10-bit XAVC is very much comparable to the 4K 12-bit RAW. So I don't really need it. It matches up very well with my C500 Mark II. And if I want to be a little bit more efficient in my post-production, I can always attach an Adamus Ninja recorder and get 422 ProRes HQ straight out of the camera. And some of you might be wondering, but why would you use ProRes? ProRes native language to Apple. So if you don't know this fun fact, generally when you import footage into Final Cut H.2.64, H.2.65, you hit optimize, it's converting the footage into 422 because it's easy to read, so it moves a lot faster. Even if the file sizes are bigger, it still is going to render out a lot faster. It's going to edit a lot faster, speeding up post-production. So the codec for me is a huge benefit for the Canon C70. The fourth thing I love about this camera is that it is the smallest Canon cinema camera, and it carries all of the features from the bigger Canon cinema cameras. Built-in ND filters up to 10 stops. It carries over the XLR inputs. It's mini, but you can buy an attachment. I bought one from Condor Blue to turn the mini into full. I'll link down everything I mentioned in the description box below if you want to check that out. But I think that is a welcome sight that I got a small form factor, still got the feel of the bigger cinema camera production cameras, and I got 16.5 stops of dynamic range. So that is a welcome sight for me. And it has force color, which the C200 didn't have. But I did use force color by having an Adamus Ninja recorder, but if I want to keep it light, I really appreciate force color being in the camera because that is one of my favorite tools to kind of use to make sure I'm getting accurate color and managing my exposure and nailing down my skin tones. And I always recommend people who have not used force color, when you first see it, it might be a little bit like, what is this? I don't want to use it. Always challenge yourself to do something different. If you're used to shooting at a 5.6, I challenge you to shoot at a 1.8. If you're used to shooting at a 1.8, I challenge you to shoot at a 5.6. What that does by challenging yourself, it allows you to be ready for whatever unexpected obstacles or hurdles coming your way in production, creativity, or just life in general. It gives you flexibility so you can adjust and be flexible with whatever comes your way. I think it's a valuable thing to add to your toolbox. The fifth thing is we're just gonna go over some miscellaneous things that I love about the camera because of the features. As I said, I can go on forever. So fifth is just gonna be miscellaneous thing. The camera's Netflix approved. So now, because it has time code, because it does 422 10-bit XAVC internal, it meets all the requirements of Netflix, and it's now a Netflix approved camera. So I have two Netflix approved cameras, the C500 Mark II, and now the Canon C70. And this is the type of camera I can take on vacation. I wouldn't want to necessarily take my C500, one, because of how expensive that camera is, and number two, the size, the form factor. It is super small, technically, for a cinema camera, but the C70 is like a 1DC. It's the 1DC we always wanted. It's the 4K, high quality image, 16 stops of dynamic range, but with an efficient codec. The 1DC was like MJPEG, which is so hard to edit if you ever tried it. We have the C-Log 2, 3, and 1, so we can color match other cameras, Canon cameras, older cameras, and if I want to match Blackmagic Red or whatever, I'm gonna shoot C-Log 2 because that gives me the widest gamut of dynamic range, which I strongly appreciate. We have the built-in ND filters, the XLR inputs, we have the RF mount, we have the ability to put on a focal reducer to get that full frame look. You also, because of the RF mount, there's so much more glass you can adapt to this camera. And even right now, I'm shooting with the Rode mic plugged in to the body of the camera and the 3.5mm jack. So if this audio is something you like, it's because I'm using a Rode Go wireless system plugged into the camera. And one of the things I love what Canon did as opposed to Sony, I don't want to seem like I'm bashing Sony, so I'm going to give a little shout out to Sony. I love that the FX6 and FX9 has that ND filter which you can turn, or you can set the auto ND so you can set your exposure and the ND will adjust automatically. That is a dope feature. Now saying that, now I got to hit Sony with a little jab. The XLR inputs are built into the top handle. So if you say, right now, the way I'm recording as I wait for my food, right now as I'm recording, you see, if I have the top handle of the Canon C70 here, it would totally be hitting the glass of the car. This is the way I kind of got to record. And you can see, this is the Canon C70. Let me turn the Samsung S20 around. This is the Samsung S20. This is the Canon C70. So being that the XLR inputs are built into the body, I don't have to worry about having a top handle. So I can stay as covert and stealth as I want. If I want to walk into a restaurant, walk into a location. Right now I'm shooting at a 3.2. I got 2 stops to ND. I'm just ready for any situation. I got the 16.5 stops to dynamic range. What I wanted in an upgrade of the Canon C100 Mark II is basically what the C70 was. Like, I wanted 4K. I didn't need RAW, but I wanted 422 XAVC. And because it's XAVC, I got SD cards, V90. You can get away with V60, but V90 if you want to do the 4K 120. We also, because of the codecs, we have long GOP and other options to increase runtime. And the last thing, the battery life. The biggest thing that I noticed when I went from a C100 Mark II to a C200 is those BPA 30s went from giving me 4 hours of life to like hour and a half of life. And now with the C70, I'm using the BPA 30s. They're giving me 3 hours of life, and it's definitely a great B camera to have. It's Netflix approved. There's nothing to hold you back. FYI, Netflix approved doesn't mean you can't sell a project you shot on another camera. It's only if Netflix hires you that you need to use a Netflix approved camera to meet their requirements. So just FYI, I wanted to throw that in there. But overall, I'm excited. RF mount lenses are being developed more and more, which means I can use some of this glass for my Canon C70. And no complaints. I hope this video was helpful. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up if it was. If you got questions, comment down below. Think about turning on notifications to be alerted when the next videos drop. And as always, stay creative, be courageous, and get on your grind.